Mercy, mercy, mercy.
Nate, welcome back. In your first or second video, you mentioned Father Sopoćko and that he had allegations of financial wrongdoing and that nothing really stuck, but perhaps where there was smoke, there was fire. But more recently, Sebastian came across a comment on Father Olowinski's blog that actually he was found guilty in an ecclesiastical court. I believe that's what it would have been, or at least some sort of hearing through the church. And you dug more into this. I was wondering what you found.
So Father Sopoćko does have against him several grave accusations and one ruling against him. The source of this information is credible in itself because it is an article in what's called Exorcism magazine in Poland. And this is a very serious Catholic journal. It's available to see online, although it's no longer in publication as of a couple of years ago. But the articles are very solid, they have high standards, and the authors are reputable. And it's a proper Catholic journal. So this is a very proper Catholic magazine that was in publication. The article title is Deceiver, Blessed Father Sopoćko, Deceiver with a question mark. It's discussing these issues that were in his history. And the original source documentation would appear to be his own diaries. And that's why we like to track that down. The issue we have with Sopoćko's diaries available today in publication is that the English version has been abridged heavily and basically redacted, where large sections have been taken out and replaced with sort of a summary of what had happened. And the text is very positive towards Blessed Father Sopoćko, as he's now known. So these are not very interesting scholarly sources, the new diary as it's available in English, because it's half abridged.
From my perspective, it looks like they're taking out perhaps some of the things that might stick to him in a canonization process. In order to fast track him for canonization, they're trying to remove things that might not be helpful for him.
Yes, it would appear this is a creation of the publicity machine for the Divine Mercy devotion itself. And what they always will do is cherry pick the very best. Sometimes they'll outright falsify things. For example, to say that the diary mistranslation or mistranscription is the reason for the ban, when many Polish bishops and Polish articles will say that the bishop's opinion was the reason for the ban. In the United States, they only say that the diary was the reason for it. And so that's actually falsification. So yes, it really happens. I've yet to come across a critical or negative piece about the Divine Mercy devotion or Faustina herself, with only several independent exceptions. Whereas every scholarly paper is laudatory, because at this point, this devotion has been mainstreamed and accepted within the Catholic Church under the auspices of John Paul II. And people are not looking at it critically for that reason. They're accepting it sight unseen because it has the stamp of approval of John Paul II. So with all of these kind of positive publicity pieces, we also have, even in pieces that are favorable in the overall tone, towards Sopoćko, towards others, they include information that is both interesting and candid. And this apparently comes from the diary. Now I'll read the introduction, which is interesting in itself. Father Michael Sopoćko was an unusually calm, compliant, and balanced man. Yet he was unusually often involved in conflicts. Witnesses who testified during his trial said he was the type of person who was quiet and humble, shying away from arguments and brawls. Meanwhile, in many places where he appeared, there were scandalous scenes, accusations, and scandals. This is like something from an investigatory piece with a high degree of criticality. However, this is an article that's actually favorable to Sopoćko. It ends up by saying this man lived this life of challenge, contradictions, and he was basically probably innocent. So it says, but let's look over the actual information that it. Now, there's several points of accusation against Father Sapashko, and none of them cast a good light on him. Number one, the section says accused of embezzlement. This is when a garrison church of St. Ignatius in Vilnius, where he spent most of his life in Vilnius, now Lithuania, then Poland. 1925, Father Sapashko, a military chaplain, they did repairs on this garrison church of St. Ignatius. They wanted to rebuild it. The project required enormous financial resources. They were not available. He organized fundraisers and collections. He was accused of embezzling part of the money collected. Now, a special commission investigated it, and they cleared him. But even after that, not everyone was convinced. Shadow of embezzlement accusation followed him for years. Now, who brought the charge, what their credibility level was, and who was unconvinced and why, we don't know. So this kind of like is a tennis hit that, hits the net and, is it on the line? Having said that, it doesn't cast a good light on him because accusations of that type are not particularly common. And the fact that he was not vindicated for everybody is also maybe an issue. Again, labeled a fraudster. Now, this has to do with when he was chaplain of the Bernardine sisters, these nuns. We don't know a lot of details about this, so we can't talk in detail. But basically, the setup is this. The nuns needed quite a lot of repairs on their convent. And Sapashko said, I will get you the money if I can lease for free. In other words, sort of, I'm prepaying you for my rent, something like that, by putting money into this construction project. Now, of course, you would ordinarily, properly, go and get contracts. And yet what happens here is that Sapashko wanted a written contract, so he says, but the nuns were really moving slowly on it. He thought there was a very good reason to start working quickly, so he let it go. And he never got a written signed contract that would state the terms of the deal. He says he got an oral agreement from the bishop. So now he borrowed large sums of money and he carried out the renovation. The work was completed. Now the trouble begins. Controversy begins here because the Bernardine sisters said that there was no deal of this type, that Sapashko had never been requested and they had never agreed that he would lease for free a part of the convent where he would then live. And now you have two sides with completely different claims. And they appealed to the bishop. Sapashko appealed to the bishop, said, don't you remember when I told you about this? And the bishop said, no, I don't remember. That is also odd that the bishop would have a lapse of memory if indeed he had agreed to it. Now, what happened then was the bishop at that point ruled with the sisters and against Father Sapashko for this claim. And this became very strange, something that the church investigated, and it was odd to the church authorities, so much so that the curious envoy says Sapashko in his diary, he wanted to cover up the matter by declaring me a lunatic. So rather than, prosecuting this, they just wanted to say that he was, a goofy and out of his mind, and that therefore, he's not really in control of his actions. That casts quite a lot of shade on, his character, the way he's willing to do business, his trustworthiness. All of these things led up to a situation where he had a public humiliation because he was in a position to be accepted for associate professor at a Catholic university in pastoral theology. And he would have been the perfect candidate, but it was unceremoniously pulled out from under him because these controversies that he had been involved with.
So it was his word against the convent's word, and they thought the convent was more credible?
Exactly this, yes. And we don't know all the details. If we knew more about it, we may have a different opinion, but we had the bishop himself, and we'll never be able to top the bishop's opinion. So yes, he ruled with the sisters, and I don't know if it was just sentimentality. No, I don't think so. I think he interviewed everybody. He didn't say it was faults on both sides. He didn't say it was a misunderstanding. He said clearly that Sapashko was in the wrong in this case. And that then again, when these strikes start to build up on your reputation, it casts your other irregularities tends to cast them in a bad light. So for example, going back to the previous accusation of embezzlement, if he could cause trouble with Bernardine sisters, did he not possibly take money that was misappropriate and take money that was not his from the previous project? So these are these suspicions that start to add up. So he did things that were absolutely illegal, apparently, or at least he was accused of them. One was he claimed in a book, I'll say he claimed, but there's a controversy about who it was. There's a claim in a book that a Cardinal Holland on his deathbed gave a prayer of approval for the Divine Mercy. Now, this claim was completely contradicted, aggressively contradicted by a bishop. I think it's Baraniak. Baraniak was very much against the devotion, along with the ordinary and other bishops. So this book claimed that Cardinal Holland, just before he died, had given his approval, basically, the Divine Mercy. It was written under the name of Father Sapachko. Father Sapachko claims later and produces the ghostwriter of the book, who, without his real approval, put his name on it. You know, they said Father Sapachko wrote a lot of it. Somebody else came in, made changes. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce his last name, but this is one of the priests. Before he was a priest, a layman, who was very much an advocate for the Divine Mercy, then became a priest who was very much an advocate for the Divine Mercy. He apparently wrote this book, or apparently wrote that part of it, but maybe he didn't. Father Sapachko simply produced him after the authorities said, "What have you done? Why have you fabricated information, lied in a book, and said this cardinal gave his approval when he never did?" So this became a very serious controversy. Sapachko's name was on the book, and he was the one blamed for it. He later produced this other person and said, "Wait, look, this guy wrote it. Ask him." The guy said, "Yes, oh, hey, I wrote it." But we don't know if that was after the fact they came up with this little idea. You'll take the blame for this because I don't want my name in the mud. But we don't know that. Now again, Sapachko, in a letter he wrote to the Holy Office, says, "I wish to clarify something. There's a claim that I have received signatures through a trick, something like an approval for maybe a pamphlet or something like that." So I don't remember immediately what the exact thing. But I've received permissions. So they said in high circles, they were saying, I received this permission through some trick. And Sapachko goes on to explain properly how he actually was not a trick, but he did it properly. But all of these accusations are in the air, and they really start to show the methods of Sapachko. They were not within the church's methods. We've seen some of the activities of Father Sapachko, and as a matter of fact, seeking money from these construction projects. The second one with the Bernardine sisters, the first one, this claim of embezzlement. It could be that Father Sapachko wanted the money for his personal project, which would have been to build a church to the Divine Mercy. Now, we have to understand that Father Sapachko's personal projects are his own, literally, personal projects. They're not of the church itself. They haven't received the permissions of the church. In fact, they're based on what the church always considers highly suspicious, which is a private revelation or apparitions, which in most cases are false, even diabolical. And the church will never go along with it until it's been carefully, critically investigated by due authorities. Due authorities would be the bishop, could be the Holy Office. Now, Father Sapachko was living his own life independently according to these Divine Mercy revelations and apparitions. They were not even given to him personally, they were given by intermediary of this nun. Our investigation here is much about private revelation, this private revelation, and the credibility of it. So we look at so many different things that we don't talk about all of them right. But we will talk about Father Sapachko, who is the priest, not the visionary, but the priest tasked by the visionary, tasked by the visions themselves, these phantoms, to do the work, the footwork, to promote this devotion. And Faustina was very demanding of Father Sapachko to do what Jesus had told her. Now, this goes back to actually something previously you were talking about, which is this other nun, this very troubling nun, this Sister Kozlowska, who demanded of priests to do her bidding, or was it Christ's bidding, or was it the devil's bidding? In the case of Faustina, there was more distance between she and Father Sapachko, but psychologically, he was completely committed to whatever she was telling him. Did he believe that it was truly Jesus Christ demanding these things? And did he really have an amnesia about the church's protocols and church law? Was his zeal so much that he developed a type of a mania that bypassed all reason and all obedience and duties as a priest and as a Catholic?
He received at least one vision. It sounds like it was the same spirit that was a manipulative spirit, threatening spirit, that also manipulated and threatened Faustina. And he's being threatened. You are responsible for this on Judgment Day. Which doesn't sound like anything Jesus would say.
Okay, now this is one of his motivations. From his diary, he says he had an actual visitation. It's the only one that we know of from this phantom, this Jesus character. He says he did not want to hang the painting when Faustina first demanded it. Let's say demanded. She insisted upon it. She was quoting possibly what was being told to her, and she took it very seriously. So she said to Sapachko, "Come what may, we must hang the painting." This is shortly after it was painted, and he had it in his possession. He did not want to do it because he knew the church was against it. There's all types of conflict in these people. Faustina and Sapachko, there's this conflict. It's not that they completely lose it overnight. There's a tug here, there's something tugging this way, something pulling that way, something pulling this way. Their right reason here. Other factors which are less credible on the other side. For example, I quote from Sapachko's diaries, "When the Lord Jesus came and threatened me, I got scared and I looked for a place to hang the painting." So shortly after that, he talked to a priest of the church and he got the priest's permission. But the priest's permission is not what you get, it's the bishop's permission that you require to hang a painting of this type. Novel imagery, he knew it was. He said it was novel imagery. And so he knew the bishop had to okay it. Let's just take out Faustina out of the equation. Let's take Sapachko out of the equation. We have this phantom demanding these things, which are against church law. How could it be Jesus? How could it possibly be Jesus? Now, when we look at private apparition, we understand that the suspicion is always against the authenticity because it will almost always be the devil or imagination, or excitement or even deception. But let's just say it's more innocent. So let's just say it's somebody being deceived by an evil spirit who can take on these forms, as we know. Or secondly, it could be somebody's overactive imagination. It can be self-suggestion, auto-suggestion. So these are things that are a lot more common than Jesus coming from heaven, or a saint or an angel coming from heaven to give somebody an authentic message. Also, authentic messages are always accompanied by preparations, by the real holiness of the person who receives it, and other things in their life, which all of these things are the background to the vision itself. In this case, we have things coming out of the blue, coming out of the mist. We have Jesus just coming to Father Sapachko and telling him, "You got to hang this painting, because if you don't, you are going to be on my bad list. There's going to be trouble for you." If Jesus threatens you, it's with a damnation. And as he said to his Faustina, "At the judgment, I will require from you the souls that were maybe lost when you didn't deliver my message." But going back to how Jesus operates, he doesn't give a nun a message and then say, if you don't get this done, if you don't get this done, you are really in trouble. You're really going to be punished. If you don't go and get this done, I don't want any excuses. That's like a demanding boss. It doesn't work at all like that. So the fact that Father Sapashko was personally threatened by this Jesus, who he says came to him, and that motivated him to have a painting hung up that he was aware was illegal, that caused him conflict with the bishop. Now let's go back. Let's look at Father Sapashko's attitude and his actions in the light of clarity. So that's in the light of the opinion of his bishop and his superior. Since we always take clarity from our superiors, and when we're looking at his case, his bishop, Jalbert Sikowski, was set against this devotion from the very beginning, when he first heard it, highly suspicious, and his opinion only became more and more set against the devotion the more he knew about it. This was always the local bishop's opinion. And the local bishop is the authority on any private devotion until possibly the Holy Office will step in. And remember, they did, and they put a thorough condemnation on this devotion. But so, when the bishop talked to Father Sapashko, at first, he really admonished Sapashko to stop thinking about this devotion, to not let himself be carried away by illusions, which the bishop was either convinced they were or highly skeptical, as he would be just on general principle. But in this case, it seems that he was really skeptical because of what he heard about the devotions. And he had talked to Faustina twice, and he had an opinion of her personally. In fact, he was her confessor on one or two occasions. He visited the convent. So with Sapashko, he was always telling Father Sapashko to stop. In other words, to get his head straight, to get his feet on the ground. Shortly after the death, I believe, of Sister Faustina, the bishop talked to Father Sapashko and admonished him strongly to stop all his activities and to also to stop his credulous belief in the words, the visions of Faustina, which the bishop told Sapashko were not real, and so he should stop. He had occasion several years later to talk to Father Sapashko again, and he discovered in that time that Father Sapashko was preaching the Divine Mercy and was promoting it, and this was against his superiors, he, the bishop, against his superiors' commands. He asked Father Sapashko, why have you been doing this? So Father Sapashko gave his explanations, which included this. He told the bishop that the revelations themselves contained an injunction to spread the devotion, and that if he procrastinated fulfilling it, he could face divine punishment. So apparently, one of the things that motivated him was a fear of God's wrath if he were to not do what Jesus told Faustina to tell Sapashko. So it's this convolution in the thought processes that Father Sapashko had clearly, to such an extent that he's forgetting his duties as a priest, as a Catholic, and as the inferior of a bishop. So in other words, his bishop, who is the absolute authority to a priest, his bishop is saying, these are not real apparitions, it's not Jesus. Then he came back, the bishop comes back and says, why have you not listened to me? You've done exactly what I said not to do. And Sapashko says, it's because Jesus will punish me if I don't do it. He's very clear. And then the bishop will, of course, say, I just told you it's not Jesus. So we have this delusion on the part of Father Sapashko. Now, this is the last thing you want to happen with a private apparition. It's the last thing you want to happen. Father Sapashko also, he did a lot of rationalizing to himself, apparently, because he said things like, I'm not really promoting this unapproved revelation. I'm promoting the divine mercy of God in an unprecedented way. I'm promoting it with this new feast day that I insist has to happen for so many good, sound theological reasons, notwithstanding all of the very, very strong theological reasons to not have a feast day of this type on this day, on the Low Sunday. Not only this, the bishop clearly told him, we never elevate one of God's attributes above the others. That would be a very foolish type of theology. We don't do that. We're theologians. So Father Sapachko also had other rationalizations for continuing his activities. One was the fact that he had received some type of oral approval, some type of encouragement. We can't say approval, probably. Cardinal Holland, before his death. This is the same cardinal that there's a claim made that this cardinal on his deathbed had issued some type of approving prayer for the Divine Mercy, which was then contradicted by his other bishop, Baraniak, who was there with him, who knew that it didn't happen. So for Sapachko earlier on thinks that Cardinal Holland has given him some type of encouragement to say, go, you have my blessing, go do this. We don't know that. Given all the other indications of Father Sapachko and his attitude, he may have received some type of mild encouragement, but it was not the same as approval. So we can't really take him at his word for that. And there's no documentation that we know about. But, these are these little grains of approval that he took is enough to continue his activities. Now, again, he received some type of approval from Krakow for an imprimatur for the prayers, the Divine Mercy. Now, these were probably just general prayers of Divine Mercy. It would not have been with Faustina's name attached to it. So it would not have been, the full scope of the revelations that we now know as the Divine Mercy devotion. So this would have been these little mercy books, these little mercy pamphlets that Sapachko is writing to advance this idea, to sort of pave the way for what we're now discussing, become this entire controversy of this mercy, this type of mercy that we're talking about. Now, his local ordinary did not give him the approval, apparently, so he went to Krakow. The Krakow, I would assume the bishop was not as familiar with what Father Sapachko was speaking of. Also the fact that he was cherry-picking. There's a high level of disobedience here. And we can see that it comes back to this sort of, personal zeal, this sort of personal crusade, this sort of personal zeal, this kind of personal mania from this really misplaced belief in these apparitions. And by the way, it's secondhand, coming from this nun. You have to investigate what is even happening to begin with. Is it authentic at all? Are they really visions? Is it hysteria, like the bishops apparently thought about Faustina? Or is it a mix of all these things? So for Sapachko to become completely convinced of all these things, his bishop says to not get carried away with illusions. And his bishop later said he was gullible. So these are all documented. This is by a bishop, Chiaresco, who wrote about Father Sapachko in detail, wrote several books and many papers about him as a priest and later as a bishop. So this is all on good authority. But we see so clearly how the Archbishop was so strongly against this devotion and also so strongly against Sapachko's activities at the time. What Sapachko did was kept his head down just enough not to get it cut off for decades. I'll be very straightforward, until the devil seized control of the Vatican after 2,000 years in a completely unprecedented way, and in this sort of nightmarish, apocalyptic situation that we find ourselves in now with this Novus Ordo. Up to that point, the church was very stable and protected itself. So Sapachko would never have been able to advance his activities. He was always tied back by his bishops and the other authorities. He was admonished in the strongest possible terms of the Holy Office in 1958 to stop entirely. He felt that that was a mistake on their part. He started saying it was a bad translation of the diary. There's this technicality that got everything canceled. He wrote many, many books on the subject of mercy, God's mercy, all of them justifying his activities that he wished to have instituted in the church, which was primarily the Divine Mercy Sunday, which must be highly effective at doing whatever kind of damage that these visions wanted to get done from the beginning, because this was the one thing that he was really absolutely commanded by Faustina, by Jesus, in quotes, commanded to carry out as his life's work, his life's mission. He said this is life's mission. And we have to not these days. Of course, two ways to look at it. You and I, and anybody who wants to be really, straightforward about this, go back. Let's go back to all stages of this. Let's look at what the bishop's opinion was when it was on the ground, when they were looking at it. Let's look at all of the activities, all of the statements of Father Sapachko, all of which is highly problematic. And we look at it in the context of church law, in the context of discernment of spirits, classically speaking, St. John of the Cross, and all the other experts on the topic, and then right reason and everything we can apply to this particular topic. When it comes to Father Sapachko, we see what his bishop says, don't get carried away, and then he did get carried away. He said he was gullible. He said he had a type of a religious mania. These are all things we'll be presenting in documentation over the course of this whole project. But we have to see Father Sapachko as being a zealot, as being overwhelmed by a delusion that turned into a fanaticism that was opposed by almost unanimously by the bishops, virtually unanimous by the bishops in the time. The Holy Office condemns that basic Catholic theology is against. So the bishops told him this. They're voicing Catholic theology. We don't elevate one attribute of God above the others. We don't elevate mercy above the others. If somebody came and said to do that, it's not Catholic. Number one, it's not in line with Catholic theology. Number two, we wonder why they did that. There was somebody who was a bit of a phantom who came and tried to get that as a feast day in the church, in the Catholic Church. That's very bold, by the way. That's very audacious, by the way. Who does that? Who is so audacious as to do that? Probably no one priest. Probably no one bad actor. Not a human, anyway. So these are pretty major things that we're talking about. With Father Sapachko, we have the clear evidence in front of us from many of his own statements that he was going outside of the authority of his bishop, that his bishop had told him to stop many times, and that he was acting on a type of a personal mission. And that all of this was dictated by the phantoms who were speaking to this nun, Sister Faustina Kowalski. So with Father Sapachko, we look at him as somebody who was deluded, and that became the substance of his life, and it really led him off track. It may have led him into these financial problems that we're talking about, these sort of dishonest, financial controversies where he's taking money. Well, it may not have been personal that he wanted it for himself. It may have been to finance these projects that he needed the money for, because the church was not on his side with them. So he thought, I can do it independently. There's also a fair amount of leeway possibly in Poland at the time, being under occupation, being during a war. It may not have been as tightly organized within the church itself. So he may have found that priests had some amount of independence and were of course expected to do things with propriety, but he may have had the independence, and with what he thought were these God-given instructions, he may have gone off and said, I'm doing the Lord's work. But we can never do that, because the chances of being misled by a false apparition without the obedience to church authorities and without the humility to accept the obedience, to accept the commands of church authorities, we're told by classical scholars and theologians, the chances of being misled by a false apparition are 100%, just about 100%.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll be back again within a week with another one. But in the meantime, please check out my Facebook page and my Twitter page. Every day I post additional content that you won't find on this YouTube channel. And also, please pray for the church.
Mercy, mercy, babe. Ooh, Lord, have mercy on me. Well, if I done somebody wrong,